Before, are you editing this to make me sound like clever and things?
Yeah, we're going to put everything out of context. That's what we're going to do.
Okay.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to IO Radio with your hosts, Adam and Sal. Peter Howson is an academic, researcher, and professor of international development at Northumbria University in Newcastle. He holds a PhD in geography and is the author of a new book on blockchain titled Let Them Eat Crypto, the blockchain scam that's ruining the world. Peter has written an interesting, informative, and invaluable critique of the now 14-year-old technology that describes a litany of exploitative practices, from environmental misinformation to widespread corporate malfeasance. Let Them Eat Crypto paints a bleak and unforgiving picture of an industry that's managed to infiltrate NGOs and institutions alike. And we are very fortunate to have the opportunity to talk with him today. Peter, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Peter, I'm really curious. I was looking at your CV and your LinkedIn, and I noticed that you had a PhD in geography. And I would like to understand how you went from studying geography and international development to becoming a critic of blockchain and cryptocurrency.
Yeah, so I started my PhD back in 2012, and I was living in Indonesia at the time. And after about 4 years of looking at carbon trading projects in Indonesia, in the forests of Indonesian Borneo, I came across this project. It's called the Rimbaraya Red Plus project that was using cryptocurrencies in order to trade carbon credits. And I'd been a skeptic of carbon trading for several years, just because it doesn't work. There's too many structural problems with it, mechanical flaws with it. And then crypto offered this opportunity to make it all work. And actually, I was a bit of a booster about it. I thought, wow, this could actually fix a lot of the problems that I'd noticed. So instead of these carbon credits being sold on a global market and all of the profits going to intermediaries like these middlemen, mainly in the US, the money could automatically come from the buyer of these carbon credits straight to the producers who lived in rural communities in Indonesia. Often these were indigenous communities. So I started looking at these for a couple of years, and then slowly my enthusiasm started waning when I realized that this was just another layer of Scammydocious nonsense that actually was making what was already a worse than nothing solution into something which was much worse. I mean, it should have really been obvious to me from the outset that if you're sending homemade internet money to indigenous communities in Indonesia, they're not going to have much use for it. And actually, it was being used as a way to steal land from already impoverished communities so that they couldn't access the forest that they needed for their livelihood. But I mean, I had to get my head around crypto and blockchain in order to really understand what was going on. And this practice is, just as any blockchain for good project, it doesn't really matter that it doesn't work. Like the whole point of a crypto project, just in the same way as with these carbon credit projects, the idea isn't really to conserve nature. The idea is to make money. So the people that end up benefiting are these. Sorry, I'm not really explaining it very well.
No. So
you can delete that a bit.
Well, yeah. Well, just to maybe expand on that a bit, before we get into the reason why blockchain is bullshit in this regard, you said you're a skeptic of carbon credits. Why is that?
So if we go back to the late 80s, the world is facing this existential crisis from CFCs, chlorinated fluorocarbons, which are being emitted all around the world from bridges and from cans of deodorant, from fire extinguishers. The effect this is having is that they're reducing the amount of ozone in the upper atmosphere and causing they're causing a hole in the ozone layer. So the world comes together at Kyoto and puts this command and control kind of form of regulation in place, which phases out very quickly the use of CFCs globally. And, you know, thanks to this Kyoto framework, we can go outside and our skin doesn't blister off and, you know, we're covered in horrible tumors. So this saved the day. Then carbon dioxide is the new bogeyman. And there's this risk that the global community is going to come together and actually phase out emissions of carbon dioxide. So the fossil fuel industry get a bit worried about this, and they suggest that we have a market-based approach so that fixing the problem of climate change doesn't have to cause a sting for them. It can actually be profitable. So they come up with this carbon trading mechanism, which enables countries in the global south to sell their forests essentially as sinks for carbon dioxide to polluters in the global north. And essentially a forest becomes a mechanism to produce these pollution permits. The problem is that a lot of these forests in the global south were never actually under threat from being cut down, and carbon credits were being produced in a disingenuous fashion.
They're not actually solving the problem. It's just greenwashing.
It's the purpose of carbon credits is to use the magic of free markets to greenwash their business as usual. This project that I was working with in Indonesia were then adding another layer of abstraction on top of this already mostly fraudulent practice of creating carbon credits by using cryptocurrencies in order to make this work. And this was a long time ago. So we're talking like 8-10 years ago that this first started. Quite recently, the World Bank has launched this program called the Climate Warehouse, which uses the Chia cryptocurrency as a way to bring together all the world's various carbon credit exchanges under one roof. And it's just completely fraudulent. Like, it can't possibly work. But the fact that it doesn't work isn't really a problem, because really all they wanted to do is to make the process of engaging with climate change profitable. So it does work for them. It just doesn't fix climate change.
I gotcha. In a previous episode of our podcast, we actually had a developer on who was working for this or a related project, and he was touting the value of decentralization, for blockchain in this application. And my argument was, if you were talking about, I guess I've heard you mention they would mint NFTs that would represent these carbon credits, and they use blockchain to trade them. It seems to me that the value of these carbon credits is predicated on them being authenticated by some kind of central authority. So there's still some central authority involved, which determines that they're valuable, right? And which ones are legitimate and which ones aren't. I never quite understood what blockchain brought to that application, other than, as you say, another layer of bureaucracy where third parties can profit from it. I was never sure, because we couldn't get him to answer. He was just a tech guy in the trenches, but we couldn't get him to answer to what degree this was really formally endorsed by the UN or by the World Bank. So you're saying that the UN and the World Bank were involved in this, and they said, "Hey, we're going to use blockchain."
Yeah, it's nuts. So I mean, the way that carbon credit markets are used, the way they should work, is that a polluter buys a verified carbon credit from a global market via a registry. So Vera is the biggest carbon registry in the world, and lots of people go to Vera to buy these validated carbon credits. One credit equals 1 ton of saved carbon. So this could be a ton of carbon which is stored in the tree that doesn't end up getting cut down. It otherwise would have if someone didn't intervene and protect it. Or it could be that someone has put a scrubber on, installed a scrubber like something that prevents carbon being emitted from a brick factory, for example. They calculate how many tons of carbon have been saved from the fact that you installed a scrubber, and then you can be awarded the equivalent amount of carbon credits to trade on a global market. And it'd be Vera that would act as a broker and hold all of these carbon credits.
So who validates that? Who determines that you're doing something that's worthy of carbon credit?
So you'd have a third-party intermediary that would come in and audit the project. For example, in the project where I was working in Indonesia, you would have an intermediary that would fly in from the US. They would calculate the amount of carbon that has been saved from this conservation project, and then they would issue credits to that project. But they would be put on a registry, on Vera's registry in this case, so that a polluter in the global north can buy them directly from the registry. And what the registry does is that they retire the credits. So they would issue, for example, 100 carbon credits, which would equate to 100 tons of carbon that was emitted by the polluter in the global north. Then the Vera would retire those credits. So they would say, right, the environmental benefit of these credits have been used up. So you can no longer trade that credit. It has been ripped up. So you buy the credit, you tear it up, done. That's the way it's meant to work. But what cryptocurrencies do is, and especially ones that use NFTs, they take a carbon credit, then they mint it onto a blockchain. What they call is they bridge it onto their blockchain as an NFT, so that it becomes completely divorced from reality. The environmental
and the ability
benefit
to legitimize it, right, and to verify it once it's on blockchain.
Yeah, exactly. And you can just keep the environmental benefit is never retired. You're just continually selling it to different people.
So you're saying that a person can create one carbon credit and it's used by multiple people. So this is actually compounding the problems,
climate change,
making things worse.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so the first project to do this was one called Save Planet Earth, where they purchased a carbon credit, 1 ton of carbon, saved carbon, from the project that I was working at, Rimba Raya in Indonesia. They minted it as a blockchain. So they paid $20 for it, and it was retired from the registry. Then they sold it for $70,000, and then it just, back and forward, it was kept as a speculative asset. So it was, the idea being that in the future, the price of this thing would go up. And, obviously people who know what they're talking about in the carbon trading world would say this is just complete stupid. Like this can't possibly work. But it seems as if this was just the start. So Adam Newman, he was a disgraced CEO of the co-working office space WeWork.
Oh, right. Okay.
So they made Apple made a documentary series about his exploits.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with WeWork.
Right. So, I mean, Adam Newman, he's obviously, disgraced after his behavior managing WeWork. The first thing he does, after all of this scandal has died down, was to set up this carbon trading NFT project, which he called Flow Carbon, which essentially just stole the idea from Save Planet Earth, and did it, and only on a much bigger scale. And then because of the big venture capitalist backers that he had, and projects like Samsung, Andreessen Horowitz, they all were behind this guy.
So where is this project now? Is it still going on? Is it fizzled out? Are people involved starting to realize it's not extended?
Well, Flow Carbon raised 70 million in startup capital. I mean, whether it works or not is completely, they don't care. Really, they don't. I mean, the idea here is to make lots of money from selling these environmental assets. But I mean, there's these like ClimaDAO, Toucan Protocol. These are fairy dust crypto carbon projects. None of them could ever work. And yet, we'll see the UN Development Programme, the UNDP. They're still singing the praises of these companies. They wrote a report, Web3 for 2030, quite recently, which has 2 or 3 pages dedicated to how these ClimaDAO, Toucan, Flow Carbon, all these projects are doing wonders for sustainable development.
Is this what motivated you to write your book?
This was my bread and butter for. I wrote something for Nature Climate Change, which was basically just saying, there's this intense argument going on about how polluting Bitcoin is. Whether it has the same embodied emissions as Sweden or Argentina or something like that. There was all this sort of, is it more polluting than the gold mining industry, for example, or something like that? And I just thought, hang on a minute, crypto is enabling this much bigger sort of scam around environmental assets at the same time that obviously is worth exploring as well. That is the motivation behind this book, yeah.
And so can you comment on institutional capture? Because it sounds like crypto promoters, crypto proponents, this industry has infiltrated the UN and NGOs, and it certainly seems as though it's infiltrated its way into certain economic or political institutions. So why do you think that is?
I mean, generally speaking, crypto blockchain fits so neatly with the very neoconservative agendas of a lot of right-wing policymakers. The fact that you can use this technology theoretically to reduce the power of the state and enable power to be accumulated in free markets. So, I mean, you could go right back to the beginning of Bitcoin. The cypherpunks were also a lot of the cypherpunks were high-tech Hayekians. These are people who saw that any state involvement in free markets is a slippery road to serfdom. So, these guys really saw the 2008-2009 financial crash was their moment to show that we can have a system of money which is, regulated or unregulated outside of the purview of the state. And I think, that dream wasn't just within this sort of underground community of cypherpunks. I think, there were a lot of policymakers that really shared this dream as well. The first people that came up with the idea of blockchain for social good came from MIT. So, I mean, Gary Gensler was, an integral part of the MIT Media Lab that was working on a lot of these blockchain projects. So Bitcoin, the MIT Bitcoin project was, he had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, it's insane to think that, Brian Ford and Jeremy Rubin founded that Media Lab.
Exactly.
Or rather, the Media Lab founded the Digital Currency Initiative. And Gary Gensler, I'm assuming, was paid a fee? Or did he get grants?
Oh, yeah, there's grants. I mean, the Media Lab is just basically an outreach for fundraising, way that MIT can get a bunch of money. And in my documentary, I publish listings of the grants and where the money is coming from. It's companies like Blockstream and that actually have products that they hope market in the crypto field, pumping money into.
Yeah, and that was something that you had mentioned, that Gary Gensler was a senior advisor for the DCI. And I thought that was incredible because, of course, he's in charge of regulating this stuff now, and he's actually been paid by these people.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, who's the pedo dude that was
Which one?
There's so many.
Jeffrey Epstein, he was solicited and gave lots of money to Media Lab as well. I mean, the Media Lab referred to Jeffrey Epstein as Voldemort, or he who must not be named. And Gary Gensler was also working within that initiative at the same time as a senior advisor. And it's, that was back in 2015. And then obviously, Ethereum was born, the general purpose blockchain that promised to solve all these other, human development challenges. And then, by 2017, under, this huge weight of fraud, the whole market collapsed. And at that point, really, I think it should have died. That should have been the end of crypto, really. But it was only because these very powerful, influential people, Andreessen Horowitz, who he invented the first internet browser. He's been a central figure in every key step of the internet, and if he has, as well as Brian Ford, Jeremy Rubin, he has the ear of very influential people, including Barack Obama and other world leaders. You've got Antonio Guterres, chief of the UN. I mean, he in 2019 sort of says that we can use blockchain to solve what he called the trust deficit disorder. The reason that communities around the world don't trust their leaders is because they don't use blockchain enough. After you've got all these completely Scammydocious cryptocurrencies that all flop, you suddenly find this massive resurgence in interest in blockchain technology generally. And I think that was born because of the Web3 movement. So really, I mean, the crypto industry had to come together and come up with this new unifying philosophical framework that they could use in order to kind of get the ear of influential people, world leaders, and say that it's integral. It's a must that you don't regulate cryptocurrency markets because they're going to solve all these problems.
I've heard you use the term crypto colonialism. Explain the proliferation of crypto projects in third world countries. Now, I understand your university is doing research into evaluating where the projects are providing any good. I'm curious how you gather data, and can you go through the details of some of these projects that you have researched? And, can you say, here's what they promised and here's what they delivered?
I mean, the research that I've been doing is collaborating with lots of other researchers around the world. Gillian Crandall, Olivier Joutel. There's many others that I've listed in the book. I could spend this whole hour listing people that I'm working with on this, but we've all done field work in different locations, and then our collaboration really has pulled it all together. It's an odd one though, really, because the blockchain scam is a linguistic scam. Like, it's all around language, I think. So it is, but I think it's sort of like, and I talk about this in the introduction of the book about how Web3 has kind of hacked the English language. That's the phrasing that David Gerard has used, and I've just, I'm leaning on. But essentially, they'll change tenses around. Like, tenses don't matter in these Web3 blockchain white papers that they write. They'll say, this is our roadmap. We've just launched this token, which took us 5 minutes and created 100 million, homemade internet money tokens. And then in 10 years' time, we're going to have satellites orbiting Mars or something, and we're going to launch these satellites, and they're going to be oracles that do all these various things, or something completely Star Trek-y and bizarre and could never actually happen. But they'll talk about it as if it is already happening. So they'll say like, we've built this Bitcoin city in, Vanuatu or something on this island. And they'll talk about it as if it is actually happening. And so lots of researchers are just saying, oh, look, now we have this evidence that this crypto blockchain thing is doing something to help poor people
I'm just wondering, are you keeping track of that? Because we know they're making lots of claims, but we're trying to keep track of their failures too.
Yes, I mean, I'm writing this paper at the minute, which is called Scam Space, because I'm trying to say that actually a lot of the land grabbing that is happening is part of a virtual land grab. A good example of this, I think, is Akon City. Have you seen Akon City? Rapper, singer,
right?
Right. So he is half Senegalese, half American. He went to the government in Senegal and said, I need lots of land because I want to build this really futuristic city.
Yeah, all that crazy architecture.
Exactly. So it's modeled on Wakanda from Black Panther Marvel comics. They donate the land to them. They evict loads of fishing communities from the land and they say, come on, this is for your own good because we're going to build this Wakanda thing, with a Akon cryptocurrency powering the whole thing. Lots of money are made out of selling Akon tokens, but the city never gets made.
Right.
I guess this, you could say this is a good thing because the city probably wouldn't have, it wouldn't have been this shining metropolis that the pictures would have you believe. It would probably be this, Kowloon city of darkness. But the land is sat there. People are sitting around it, all these fishing communities that have lost their livelihoods thinking, when is this city going to get built? Because I was kind of relying on this for my, pay my kids' tuition or whatever. So the land grab itself, or the land itself, is used to facilitate the scam. Doesn't actually ever get used. And you could see this everywhere. Everywhere that you find like a Bitcoin city promised, from the actual Bitcoin city in El Salvador. Doesn't exactly. Well, I mean, so El Salvador is a good example because it's, they just say, oh, it's going to have a Bitcoin symbol visible from space. And as soon as you see that written down, you're like, oh, it's not going to happen. And they said this in Vanuatu as well, with Satoshi Island. This is going to be a city for 21,000 homes put on this tiny little island in Vanuatu. It's real. It's really real. And it's like, it's not real. And there's not ever going to be a city there. But you've evicted all of these local workers who are paying the price for this scam, So the land is actually being, enrolled into this scam, but it doesn't actually work in the same way as kind of previous colonial conquests. I say Puerto Rico definitely is a really good example for, like, I guess, a more traditional form of colonialism, where the government put in place these laws, these tax incentives in order to try and attract Americans to Puerto Rico so they can set up businesses and, create new jobs and bring prosperity and all that. And then crypto blockchain guys led by Brock Pierce and others have come down, built these gated communities, and screwed over the locals and priced them out from their nice beachfront properties and things. They use Hurricane Maria and these other crises, including kind of debt crisis that are going on there as well, as their opportunity to come in and pinch everyone's stuff for cheap. The traditional kind of disaster capitalism playbook.
I'm curious. I just want to expand on that because obviously you're talking about almost there's an effect on foreign countries. There's a displacing of residents who live there. There's economic exploitation, but it actually is potentially even worse than that. And in the book, you call out the energy situation in Kosovo and Serbia, as well as the energy situation in Kazakhstan. And you draw some links between Bitcoin mining and actual real world conflict, whether it's ethnic or anti-government conflict. Could you talk to us a bit about that, about how that occurs?
Yeah. So in the UK, I don't know if you got this in the US, but when we were kids, to teach us how to brush our teeth properly, they'd give us these plaque disclosing tablets. So you put it in water, swish it around your mouth, and then the bit you haven't cleaned properly would kind of glow blue. It was probably toxic and gave us all these diseases, but like it would teach you to kind of brush your teeth properly. This is what Bitcoin does, I think. Bitcoin is attracted to corruption, conflict, climate breakdown, areas where there are people suffering from wars, and it sticks to them in dark clumps. And wherever you find Bitcoin, generally speaking, you'll find corruption, war, and conflict. It's a really good marker for shit hitting the fan, I think. And it was so weird that in 2019, I started writing a paper which was looking at the kind of urban materiality of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And, I was saying that, Transnistria, which is, a breakaway part of Moldova, and Ukraine and the Russian borderlands, this is where Bitcoin miners seem to be like pooling their resources. And then what do you know, like a year or two later, the conflict breaks out in those areas. And I'm not saying that Bitcoin caused them, but Bitcoin is an excellent marker for those problems.
So where there's political instability, where there's a lack of regulation or enforcement, that's where miners will be drawn to, especially if they can potentially bribe local authorities to receive discounts to get cheap electricity and to dump those externalities on the local populace.
You see that from, Texas to Central African Republic. Like it does seem that like wherever you've got a kind of crappy electricity grid, which is, and people stealing electricity, that's where you get Bitcoin miners. And that was the case in China when China had 70% of the Bitcoin miners being hosted in the southeastern provinces, where there was a lot of excess hydroelectricity. And then, during the dry season, they would all move up to where there was a lot of coal in the northern territories, because they could buy that coal for cheap from corrupt leaders. And when China kicked them all out, they went to the first corrupt country they could find, which was Kazakhstan. And even though there was an energy crisis that was going on in Kazakhstan, there was, local people couldn't meet their own needs in terms of their energy requirements. The leaders there sold lots of coal to Bitcoiners because they could make that. It was sort of, crony capitalism that enabled them to make lots of money directly from Bitcoin miners. And I think you kind of touched on this before, that actually, a lot of these crypto projects are like, I've forgotten the word you used, but they are parasitic. Like they can quite easily unplug from wherever they are and just move to the next host. And that's how they move. So Bitcoin miners will just go find a host that is a country with corrupt governments and cheap electricity. They'll plug in and suck as much as they can until they've either killed the host or the host kicks them out. And I think to some extent that's what we're seeing in Texas now. So we are seeing these grassroots movements that are trying to get rid of these Bitcoin miners. But there's a lot of corrupt leaders as well in Texas, which are keen to keep them around. So,
and obviously those residents, and we've spoken to Jackie Sawicki, which I know you quoted in the book, and they're very concerned. The activists are very concerned about the environmental damage that Bitcoin mining causes, both in terms of carbon emissions from fossil fuel use, but also in terms of e-waste, in terms of noise pollution. Could you speak to could you speak about some of the environmental externalities that are at play with mining and cryptocurrency?
Yeah. So the with Bitcoin mining, the vast majority of it comes from fossil fuels. So the most recent data from last year, Bitcoin alone was using between 150 and 210 terawatt hours per year of electricity, which is, somewhere between Belgium and Argentina, somewhere, a medium-sized developed country's worth of electricity. 70% of that was from fossil fuels. So, I mean, that's a massive amount of carbon emissions every year. It's about the same as Switzerland. So there is that. I mean, the other problem, which is, I mean, to some extent, is perhaps even worse, is the amount of e-waste that is being produced. So the up-to-date data suggests it's about 37,000 tons of e-waste is produced because of all the ASIC machines that are being turned over, because miners constantly have to buy new ASIC machines as new ones come on the market that are more efficient. Because if they don't, then they are effectively just wasting their energy because they can't compete against the more up-to-date units.
And a lot of these crypto miners who are claiming that their power sources are environmentally friendly are using hydropower. But in the book, you have a good point about the fact that in some cases, hydropower facilities often emit as much carbon as fossil fuel plants. Why is that?
Yeah, so I mean, this is something that I saw in Indonesia, but you see these in South America as well, because you have to essentially flood an area of land which did have a forest on it. You're converting a forest which sequestered a lot of carbon. So land that is a sink for carbon turns into a source. And let's say if you've got 100,000 tons of carbon which is stored in a forest, if you cut down that forest and flood the land and create a reservoir for a hydropower plant, then that carbon is going into the atmosphere. So, I mean, this is why a lot of the calculations suggest that hydropower has a pretty much the same carbon emissions as coal-fired plants in some places. But also you have to account for the butterfly effect as well, that these, the network effect that that Bitcoin has. So let's say if I want to become a Bitcoin miner, I buy loads of ASIC machines. The figure is 1.8 million worth of ASIC units in order to win the Bitcoin bingo once a week. If I buy all of that equipment, and then I'm a good environmental citizen, so I decide I'm going to use renewables to mine my Bitcoin. The fact that I've entered the competition means that all the other miners worldwide have to work harder. They have to use more ASIC units. They have to use more power from the sources that are available to them.
Right.
So that just because I've entered the competition, Bitcoin's overall carbon emissions increase, even though I am only using 100% renewables. So this is something I've argued for many years now, that really no such thing as a green Bitcoin, because of the network effects of proof of work has.
Yeah, and in blockchain in general, I've heard you compare blockchain to what's known as a mechanical Turk, an 18th century mechanical invention supposedly could play chess that turned out to be a fraud that was controlled by humans. I think that's definitely an amusing analogy, but I also think it gives blockchain more credit than it actually deserves, because unlike blockchain, this mechanical Turk, fraudulent or not, it actually did something better, right? It played chess relatively well, even if it was fraudulent. Whereas blockchain, I've been asking this question over and over, it doesn't seem to do anything even hardly as well as what we've already been using. And I've been struggling to come up with a good analogy to compare to blockchain. And the closest that I could come to is not a technology, but more of an ideology, like astrology, believing in something strongly that actually doesn't do anything that anybody needs. I'm curious if you got any better comparisons or analogies. What could we compare blockchain to that people could understand how utterly useless it is?
So in the book, I come to the same conclusion I think that you guys have come to. Well, I know you guys have come to it because I've watched your documentary. But the blockchain really is not an innovation. It's an illusion of innovation. I mean, it's in a similar way. I think, like if you watch the Saw movies, I was going to watch Saw X this evening after this
Family
conversation.
film?
Yeah. Kids are in bed. You don't watch a film like that and go, oh, he's a very innovative man. This person has put all these elaborate traps together, because the innovations that he's put together are solving no problems. They're not helping achieve any kind of human flourishing or anything like that. So you can't really call them innovations, even though they might be sort of technically quite novel. And I think that's how we have to look at blockchain as well. That it doesn't solve. It makes so many challenges that we currently face far worse. So the climate crisis, the energy crisis, the what Guterres calls this trust deficit disorder. It compounds all of these problems. It is Saw. It's Jigsaw, is that his name? The guy from those films. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of words that I was thinking. Well, how can we better think about mining, like Bitcoin mining? Because really, I think mining suggests that something is being produced and created, and really, these guys are just playing guess.
It's actually something that's being demanded. It's not that something's being produced. It's that there's an investment of money that's demanded. And so when you look at Bitcoin and how economic transactions occur, it's completely inverted compared to a regular economic transaction, where usually you're paying someone and they're giving you something that's useful, or they're doing something that's useful. So there are always these exchanges of utility and value, or of utility for value. But Bitcoin inverts that, or rather, it's an investment of value, and it promises some value in return at a later date. It's not a valid economic transaction. The only time you see exchanges of value for pure value is in fraud. So this is why I would say we don't see a use case for Bitcoin or for crypto. We never will, because in a regular economic transaction, the utility is objective. It's your valuation of that utility that's subjective, based on, if you think that is something is useful or not. But crypto is an objective value. They say, invest this much money, you must pay this much. And then the utility that you derive from that is entirely subjective. It's completely inverted from a normal economic transaction. So
totally. I mean, all of these tokens are created, and then the market has to be convinced that their value. Well,
there's one thing that I do want to ask you, which maybe is me playing a bit of a devil's advocate here, which is in the book, you described how crypto is funding Sci-Hub, and that's a website. If anyone doesn't know what Sci-Hub is, you can go on Sci-Hub and you can download academic papers for free without it being paywalled. So in some ways, it is a website that's challenging a huge scam in the modern era, which is the paywalling of publicly funded research. So don't we have to admit that, there are some legitimate criticisms of the existing power structures, economic and political institutions, et cetera, and that B, in some edge cases, crypto is potentially helping the right cause.
But couldn't you do that without non-crypto funding? There's non-crypto ways of.
Well, in this case, it's, and we should let Pete speak to it, but in this case, because they are technically, I think, violating some copyright laws, because they're making this research available that otherwise would be paywalled, they've had their banking shut down, and they're not able to accept actual donations in US dollars, and the person is keeping this website going with, I guess, crypto donations. So how would you respond to, a crypto proponent saying, well, look at this. This is something good that crypto is doing?
Yeah, I mean, the final chapter of the book addresses this question. And essentially, I argue that just as there's no such thing as a green Bitcoin, there is no such thing as an emancipatory cryptocurrency that can save us from hypercapitalism. I mean, that being said, though, I mean, I used to work for a charity, the Latin American Foundation for the Future, or LAF. I was a trustee, and I wrote a position paper for the charity that was suggesting perhaps we should use cryptocurrencies as a way of sending money to beneficiaries in Peru, which is where most of our projects were. And I wrote another paper, which was an academic paper, which kind of was a more critical version of that position. And I was trying to basically say that, charities like Greenpeace were fundraising in Bitcoin. Sea Shepherd are still fundraising using Bitcoin. Democracy Now! Julian Assange, who was a, WikiLeaks guy, the founder of WikiLeaks and a founding cypherpunk. Edward Snowden. Like there's all these influential people that I think that, well, maybe you don't, but I certainly can see eye to eye with in terms of their politics and their, want for a better world. But it isn't crypto that enables that better world. You find that these crypto proponents are like, crypto is the answer. It's like, no, WikiLeaks is the answer, not the crypto bit. And it is, there is this myth that, we can solve the problems with capitalism with hypercapitalism.
The market just isn't free enough. We need to free it up even more. More freedom in that market. Yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, this is, I think, you could look at Greenpeace now. So Greenpeace have put together this project, Change the Code, Not the Climate. And they've turned full circle. Like they've put their hands up and said, cryptocurrency fundraising was counterproductive to the world that we wanted to create.
So the ultimate, answer to that question is that it's causing more harm than good. That ultimately it's a net negative on society.
But I mean, I've spoken to people who have done fundraising with crypto, who have now stopped, because they were saying that they received so few Bitcoin donations anyway. Right. It wasn't really worth it, and it was more of a kind of public relations kind of disaster for them, really, and it wasn't really worthwhile. Honestly, I think if you spoke to people at Democracy Now! And said, should you be fundraising with crypto, I think most people there would go, do we fundraise in crypto? I didn't even know if we did.
But there's another part of this too, that there's the back end of it, right? If you're sending somebody crypto, they're not going to be able to necessarily pay their rent and pay their salaries in crypto. That crypto is still going to have to be converted into fiat. And so that's where they're subject to all of the same problems that crypto promises to bypass.
No, yeah, I mean, that's it. It's, you'll see, I watched a video just before this conversation. I think it was Cointelegraph had released another documentary where they, say that Bitcoin is fulfilling these wonderful use cases, being used for, enabling poor people to send remittances home and things like that with no fees. And it's like, well, yeah, if they want to spend the money, they have to convert it. And Bitcoin has fees. You pay network fees when you transmit Bitcoin. But there's projects that I talk about in the book. One of them's in South Africa. In Mosel Bay in Cape Town, there's a project called Akasi, which is a Bitcoin education center, which was first developed as a surf school. But now it's kind of like a boot camp to try and recruit local children, and try and, I guess, get them to unbank themselves, as a way of sort of like pushing back against, the rich white people that surround this township. But really, like you look at the effect this is happening. You're basically preying on the poorest. Not you. This project is preying on the poorest children in South Africa, who are already very vulnerable and marginalized, and using them as this kind of PR operation to try and show that, like, Bitcoin can be used to fulfill its original use case as a peer-to-peer system of digital cash. In reality, it can't, because they can't spend that money. They're saving something that is, doesn't have a future, and you're robbing them of their future.
Yeah, and you're robbing them of an actual real solution for the problems as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these kids would have been giving surf lessons to local people and making money and getting, making a livelihood for themselves. And then these crypto nutcases come along, and often with a lot of these projects, it comes with religious rhetoric as well. So it preys on the fact that a lot of these communities are very religious. They're very, they have devout Christian beliefs. So you'll have this. This was the case in Peru, where I've been working. There was a pastor and this.
I kind of want to read this passage from the book, actually, because I think it's great writing, and it's a great example of what you're talking about. And it's about the synthesis of religion and Bitcoin. And you wrote, across South America, Christian preachers doubled as door-to-door salesmen for crypto projects. For the evangelical Christian missionary, Patrick Melder, who had preached the gospel around the globe, Bitcoin was the truth and the light. Like Christ's second coming, Bitcoin's eventual dominance is inevitable, he said. Melder reportedly admitted that his techniques for spreading the message of Bitcoin using children, promising riches, door knocking, were the same as those used by real Christian missionaries. Melder explained to his flock that Satoshi Nakamoto's gift to humanity, followed by sudden ascendance, is indistinguishable from the story of Jesus Christ.
So he wrote a book with those. It's from his own book. That, that's not just my perspective, that's his perspective.
Yeah, no, and it's a brilliant calling out. It's just incredible. This Nakamoto, this guy invents this thing that requires you to invest money and then disappears after the hash rate starts spiking. And then, that's like Jesus. That's exactly like Jesus.
Yeah.
It's more, cult-like than technology.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I've got nothing against, people against Christians. But I do have a problem with people who prey on people because of, to execute an affinity fraud, which is essentially what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, these people prey on children, they prey on the vulnerable, they prey on the economic disenfranchised. They are ghouls. They're ghouls. And so I guess this raises the question of, how do we address cryptocurrency? What do we do to solve the problem? And I had another quote from the book that I really liked that I thought I would read here, and maybe that'll lead into a discussion. Quitting blockchain does not stifle innovation or human development. It stifles fraud, conflict, and climate breakdown. But just because blockchain is terrible tech doesn't mean it will fade into obscurity on its own. The worst human inventions, from asbestos, toothpaste, to leaded petrol, have all hung around for longer than they ideally should. Cutting our losses and moving on from blockchain requires a purge, exposing the levers under the cabinet and the deceptive motives of the men inside. And you also pointed out that it's important to potentially ban it, because banning crypto affects market confidence, and without confidence, then there's no con. So it seems like that's your desired solution, but is that realistic given the institutional capture that we've talked about?
Well, I mean, it has happened. There's several countries that have done it. The biggest example is obviously China. So I think it's the same as in the UK and the US. Like speeding is an offence, and you'll get a fine if you're speeding very fast and dangerous driving. Then you could end up with a prison sentence. So just because you could say, oh, well, there's no point making speeding illegal because everyone will speed. It's like, well, actually, probably most people are good people and they would try not to. So I mean, just because banning crypto won't get rid of crypto doesn't mean we shouldn't, because actually most people would not, and it would bring the price right down.
Sorry, do you feel that applying existing securities laws would have the same effect as banning crypto explicitly?
Yeah, no, I mean, you could do anything that will bring the price of crypto down will put people off, because its only value proposition is the fact that it is a speculative asset. Other than, it can be used for sanctions evasions and money laundering and things like that. Other than that, all those illegal things, it is used as a speculative asset. So if the price is, just free falls for long enough, then you get a Bitcoin death spiral, and Bitcoin miners just say, "Oh, I've had enough of that."
Right.
I'm losing money because I'm just burning through electricity for no reason for an asset that has no future, and it would just die.
So speaking of it not dying yet, I've heard you talk a lot about how the mainstream media, such as the Daily Mail, are apprehensive to actually call out crypto as a scam, despite us all generally agreeing there's overwhelming evidence that it is. Do you think that there is any different approach that we can take to change the fact that there's still a tremendous amount of influential media out there pretending this naked emperor is wearing a tuxedo?
So the very first interview that I ever did on cryptocurrencies and NFT fraud and things like that was in 2019, and it was on a US cable channel, Peacock. Do you know that? Peacock.
I've heard of it.
Okay. And it was like a teen news thing. So they were asking me questions about someone had minted a photo of a sandwich from Fire Festival as an NFT, and they asked me to come on and give my opinion about how much it should sell for and things like that. And obviously my perspective was, this is all wash traded,
right?
Stuff. It's a scam. And it was the same thing with the Daily Mail guy that called me up to ask me how much he should sell his picture of his kid for or something, because they wanted to just tell this story of sort of market mania and delusion of crowds. Like, aren't people stupid? They think that these silly things have more value than they actually have. But if you say, well, actually, no, this isn't just people being stupid. This is people being defrauded because of wash trading and market manipulation. There's lots of evidence now that shows that the majority of Bitcoin transactions are fraudulent. So this goes all the way down. It's not like any one actor in blockchain is different. They're all subject to market manipulation practices. But if those media outlets were to say, oh, this is actually fraudulent practice and it's all wash trading and illegal activities that are being carried out by, for the most part, venture capital firms, like big, powerful people, they don't want to say that, because then they have to point a finger at someone and accuse them of a crime. And then, this funny story that they wanted to tell is no longer funny. It's a bit sort of dark. So this is why I think it was around for so long, because there was this sort of faceless, because of its pseudonymous nature. You don't actually, it's not obvious to anyone who's actually committing the market manipulation. Am I making myself clear? Maybe I can say it's a different. Yeah. So I think, that's the thing. It's a NFT specifically was a very funny thing. It was such a stupid. Some of the images that sold for hundreds of thousands. Yeah, it goes right to the very top. And we in the UK, Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, is actively endorsing NFTs. He asked the Royal Mint to mint a set of NFTs to showcase a new innovative global Britain. And if you're just a normal person who reads the Daily Mail and listens to Rishi Sunak, you're going to think that this is a legitimate practice. But in reality, it's just market manipulation and fraud.
First, I want to also thank you for in the book talking about clawbacks, because that's something I think we need to talk about more, especially using the Madoff investment. Is it Madoff and Madoff? The Madoff investment scheme, as context, because this money should be returned. But also, I wanted to ask you, in the book, you talk about how the Mechanical Turk inspired Charles Babbage to design with Ada Lovelace the world's first programmable computers, the difference engine and the analytical engine. Crypto, as its heart, uses very real problems to promulgate its spread. But what it offers up is a solution that's worse than the problem it was claiming to solve. Do you think that crypto gives us any clues as to what we need to build to solve the root causes of those problems?
Yeah, so this is how Web3 problem solving it works in reverse. So essentially what crypto blockchain proponents tend to do is that they take any problem and then they'll just reframe that problem around the solution which they have, which essentially is a cryptocurrency or a blockchain. And going to the start of our conversation talking about carbon credits, so it's exactly the problem is that we burn fossil fuels and that is changing the composition of the atmosphere. That's the problem, but that's not a convenient problem. So it needs to be reframed so that it suits the interests of blockchain and crypto proponents and carbon credit producers. And that's Web3 problem solving in action. And I think that will continue across any global development challenge that we face. If we have the same Silicon Valley crypto blockchain interests that are steering the decision making around how we engage with those global development challenges. So what I would have liked to have done if this was, if I had another 300 pages to play with a book, is to say, what is an alternative to Web3 problem solving? Like, how can we have a digital innovation which is actually innovative and actually enables human flourishing? And there's a few good ideas, I think. So Cloud Money, Brett Scott, I spoke to him for this book just to sort of, and he was saying, well, we need to start using paper money again and living locally. So I spoke to Anistra Nelson, who made a very compelling case for her book, and suggesting that money itself is a fig leaf, that we ultimately need to move beyond it altogether. So we need to just stop always allowing the same free market interest to steer our problem solving strategies.
We're asking you to solve the crypto problem. So,
Well, just the world.
Yeah, and the world, yeah.
And
all social problems.
All problems. Yeah. To some extent that was never really the intention of the book. But really, I was trying to highlight the way that disingenuous humanitarian claims were being deployed in order to legitimize the crypto industry. That was the purpose of the book.
For me, in terms of answering this question, I do think crypto gives us some clues. I would say that it points to the fact that in many cases, the problems aren't necessarily solved with technology, but they have to be solved with governance. And we have to take a close look at the governance structures that we have, why they're failing to solve some of these problems, and what we actually have to do to fix them. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think going back to the point that you made earlier around the fact that we've got a Sci-Hub that's, using technology in order to, fix this problem that we have in terms of the, enclosure of the digital commons. I mean, really, like, what makes that a virtuous project is the fact that it is challenging established power structures. And I think what a lot of crypto and blockchain projects do is that they just perpetuate the power structures that we have. Their goal isn't to change anything. It's just to keep things the same. But it's all masked as this sort of like, this revolutionary, disruptive technology, when really it couldn't be any more conservative.
And in the case of Sci-Hub, it points to a specific policy prescription, which I know, Adam, you'll like, which is that publicly funded research should be available for free. It shouldn't be paywalled. If the public paid for it, the public should have access to it. That should be a law.
I completely agree. I just think a lot of people, they're crypto plays into that narrative that the government is out to get everybody. I have one question that I want to kind of make a recurring question that we ask every guest on, because it's a question that I ask continuously as I'm engaging with people in crypto. And we're 15 years approximately into crypto and blockchain. And a simple question that I keep posing that I have yet to get a good answer for. And I want to make a point of posing this to everybody I can. But the question is simple and straightforward. Can you name any specific thing that blockchain technology is uniquely good at?
It's good at sanctions evasions. It's good at lots of things. It's good at
money laundering, crime.
Yeah, so it's good at money laundering, sanctions evasions. It's good at tax evasion. But I think that they're all wonderful things if you see that the state is a corrupt entity which is oppressing people and stealing their money in the form of taxation. So I mean, for that reason, cryptocurrencies are brilliant. But the problem is that, governments are incredibly under-resourced. The reason that the UN, I think, is such a strong proponent of cryptocurrencies is because they know that their ability to mobilize the resources that they need is just going to get smaller and smaller. And so they have to come up with an alternative. And that is just to buy into the sort of neoconservative dream of anarcho-capitalism. I think we should look at blockchain in the same way as we look at mustard gas and those little polystyrene balls that you get in boxes of stuff you've ordered from Amazon. Like, there's nothing there worth us holding on to. We need to move on from it. It doesn't do anything of value. It doesn't make our lives better. It doesn't improve human flourishing. It was a scam, and we need to hold our hands up, if not us, but people who were proponents of it, and move on, because it can't make anyone's lives better. It makes all our global development challenges far more difficult to fix.
Peter, I know you are not just interested in crypto, but you are a professor of human development. Could you talk about some of the other things you've been working on lately?
Yeah, I did catch your article where you were talking about space colonialism and space tourism. You're not necessarily a big fan of that, right? Can you share with us what your beefs are with that?
Again, the overlaps with Web3 are very stark. You've got essentially this mission to colonize the cosmos. Colonizing the cosmos is not in humanity's interest. It's in the interest of very rich people. And the costs are being borne by the poorest people. I mean, again, this is from research that I've been doing in Indonesia. So last year I went to the island of Biak, which is a tiny island off the coast of West Papua. There were lots of indigenous people, pretty much the whole island, were being evicted from their customary land that they've relied on since time immemorial. in order to make way for a SpaceX launch site. And it was to solve this launch site isn't going to send anyone to Mars. It isn't going to help us understand global climate change or anything like that. This is purely to help people, access Netflix and online pornography faster. This is not going to solve any big human development issues. This is to help the very rich people make lots of money. So I'm at the start of that journey. We did a small project in Scotland because the UK are jumping on the bandwagon and setting up a lot of space launch sites in Scotland. And again, it is these remote communities that were struggling to make ends meet as crofters that are paying the price for rich people to get more rich.
Peter, I just want to thank you for joining us. It's been extremely informative, and I really enjoyed the book. I learned a bunch of new things, which is always great because this is something that I'm steeped in, the area of crypto criticism. But is there anything you'd like to tell our audience before you go?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. The book's out in all bookshops or Amazon if you can't get to a bookshop. But yeah, preferably you'll go to a bookshop and you'll pay with real money.
All right, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in and listening to the latest episode. If you'd like to find out more about Peter and his work, you can visit his website at peterhowson.org. That's peterhowson.org. Find out more about his book, his other writings, and all of that stuff. And if you'd like to find out more about our show, be sure to visit ioradio.org. You can find links to articles, all of the episodes, and more. We have a Discord that's very popular, and you can also catch us on most of the podcasting platforms if you search for IO Radio. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at YouTube/American Scream Video. Thanks for listening, everybody.